Vitor Pereira has returned to the Premier League as the Nottingham Forest manager. He was sacked as the Wolves boss earlier in the season. I can't work out whether or not this is a more or less inspiring appointment than Igor Tudor Crook, because this is, I, I don't know. Vitor Pereira has been linked with Premier League jobs. He eventually got the Nottingham Forest job. The Wolverhampton Wanderers job. Now he's got the Nottingham Forest job. But he eventually got the Wolves job after being linked with the Everton job and almost getting that, and linked with many other jobs over the course. His agent, I'm guessing it's George Mendes. Am I right?
You might be right there, yeah.
I don't know how I managed to guess that. Has been touting him around for a very long time. What has he done to earn the right to be considered a better option for Nottingham Forest than Sean Dyche?
Well, it was only a couple of weeks ago he was touting himself for the Leicester job in the Championship. So this has obviously developed quite quickly. What has he done? Well, I guess if you're making a case for the defence, you would go back to his first few months in charge at Wolves when he did bring a real uplift. It was pints with the fans and very much points on the board as well to steer them to safety. But if you're making a case for not hiring him, you would look at how it unraveled at Wolves, and it was very toxic by the end of his tenure. He might say, well, actually, you sold all my players, which is true. And that's what concerns me, because you look at Wolves, he had Jurgen Strand Larsen in brilliant goal-scoring form. Forest haven't got a striker who can do that in the Premier League, I don't think. He had Matheus Cunha, who was a match winner. He had Ryan Aït-Nouri marauding from left-back. So he had the tools. And I look at this Forest squad, and they've invested heavily. And I think, by the way, we're going to start seeing stories about the future of Edu as overall
Yeah,
head of football
and
operations.
rightly so.
I think that relationship is going to come to an end because their signings have been poor,
Well,
particularly
I
the
mean, I'm
ones
not
that
saying he
Edu
should
has
get
made.
sacked, but definitely, like we said last week on this podcast, maybe there should be a little bit of scrutiny on that situation, because
Yeah.
arguably that's where the whole falling out with Nuno Espirito Santo started.
Yes, it was, because Nuno wasn't convinced by the recruitment, and you have to say he's been proved right. You know, Muendo was signed for a lot of money, is now at Frankfurt and scoring goals in the Bundesliga, which again highlights the difference between some of the top European leagues and the Premier League. Alexander Zinchenko came in. Clearly, he was an Edu signing, having had him at Arsenal. They had to terminate his loan. He was so unsuccessful. Amari Hutchinson has just been added to the Europa League squad, but he's not pulled up any trees so far. They've obviously had issues in the goalkeeping department. They've now got Stefan Ortega, and again, he was registered for the Europa League squad for this playoff round. So a lot of the signings don't bear scrutiny. I think part of the issue with Sean Dyche, actually, was that he was telling Marinakis, some of these players that you've hoisted upon me are not fit for purpose. So I think Vitor Pereira's got a massive job on his hands. You can't turn water into wine, to quote one of Scott Minto's favourite phrases.
They are away in Fenerbahce on Thursday night. We're recording this during the day on Thursday. So we don't know the Crystal Palace result. We don't know the Nottingham Forest result. But what is very difficult for Vitor Pereira is, no matter what happens, is that his team have travelled to Turkey, and then they have to go back and face Liverpool, Scott, this weekend. Now, look, it's not an easy game if you've got a whole week to prepare. It's certainly not an easy game if you travel back Thursday night and you find yourself with just one training session, or maybe even just a walkthrough and a recovery before you travel to the game on Sunday.
Yeah, new managers, what do they want? We mentioned about Igor Tudor would have been pulling his hair out what he's got left of it, knowing that the players are 5 days away at Spurs. Well, Vitor Pereira just hasn't got the ability to do that with the game against Fenerbahce. Look, I mean, obviously, there was the link with and the fact that he did well in a short space of time at Olympiacos a decade ago, but that was a decade ago, and that was a different football, as Crookie was saying, with the Premier League and Igor Tudor. So I'm with you. Which one are you going to get here with Vitor Pereira? The one that came into Wolves and kept them up, but had the likes of Matheus Cunha to step up and show a bit of magic, or the one that just bombed, had a bit of control of the transfer market at the Wolves and then just bombed this season? I think he's a really, really good coach. Again, this is another one where this is such a tough one to call. It really is. And the owner, let me just say, the owner does have to take a lot of responsibility here. There's the bigger picture, and the fans love him for where he first picked up. But the Edu thing, if you're going to get rid of Edu, if you really don't believe in him anymore, then what a horrendous error that was to break up the Marinakis Nuno Espirito Santo relationship where it was going so well. And even if they did fall away, from a Champions League place to a Europa League place, well, that's still an incredible season.
And you've lost Ross Wilson in the process as well, who's a very capable sporting director who's gone on, obviously, to Newcastle United. So there's a lot of moving parts that's happened at Nottingham Forest. But I get the feeling that Nottingham Forest is a little bit like a sort of a Dodgem circuit. It's always moving and everyone's always bumping into each other. And at some point, someone's got to get off. Obviously, the turnaround is very quick for Nottingham Forest, but for Liverpool, they've had a free week for the first time in a little while, and the feeling is that they're starting to play a little bit better. Crook, obviously, their ambition is to get back in the Champions League, and it's quite a competitive race now, isn't it, to get into that top 5?
Yeah, I think the Sunderland result for me was really important for Liverpool to become the first team to go there and win. I think was a massive statement of intent. They backed it up by beating a strong Brighton side, albeit one in not great form, in the FA Cup. So I do think a corner has been turned. I do think recent performances and results have been better, and I expect them to win at Forest. I really do. I think it's difficult for Pereira to balance a tricky trip in Istanbul, and I think the owner's still got aspirations to go deep in the Europa League, despite the fact that clearly Premier League survival is the priority. And Liverpool should be fresher. They should be sharper. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be a honeymoon start to life at the City Ground for Vitor Pereira.
I just wonder whether or not, Scott, and I suppose you would never advocate this, but there might be a time when you look at the Premier League table and you start thinking to yourself, we probably should focus on staying in the Premier League rather than worrying about getting Europa League glory.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is I think sometimes it can be a really good distraction. If all you've got is day after day, sort of the gloom of being down there, then that there's no escape from reality. I mean, I was talking at the weekend, and I also heard Piercy say the same thing with the FA Cup. But at least you're travelling within England. Then, if you're travelling different places, that can affect then the league form going into that Sunday game. But look, the bottom line is 100% all about the Premier League. And I think Forest do not get anything out of this game. I actually think because Liverpool are on 42 points, it was a massive win for them against Sunderland. It really was, not just because they were the first team to win up there, but you see where they are. And it was a really big win for Aston Villa against Brighton. It wasn't a big win. It wasn't a great win. It wasn't a great performance. But that means they're 8 points ahead of Liverpool right now. And that gives them a real buffer. Because I think from 3rd to 6th, someone's going to lose out in that Champions League spot. And it would be unacceptable if it were to be Liverpool. And Villa looking a little bit tired at the moment. The home form has been brilliant all season, but not in recent times. So that win for me was absolutely massive. But I think Liverpool, free week up against a team that hasn't, they've got better players. They're going to win this game.
We love that, Scott. Nice little revelation there, teaching us the maths, the fact that between 3 and 6, someone's going to miss out on a Champions League place when they're only 5. So, yeah, that is definitely true. But Brentford are, hanging on in there, aren't they? They're only 4 points behind Chelsea in 5th, which is an amazing achievement already. But it is very tight for those European places because basically the way it works is this. England gets 4 Champions League places and a Europa League place via the league. Now, we know that never works out like that because what happens is that they do really well in the European competition. So they get 5 Champions League places. That knocks everything down a place. So 6 ends up being the Europa League and the top 5 go into the Champions League. Then someone from the top 6 usually wins one of the cup competitions. We know that's definitely going to be the case because Arsenal and Manchester City are playing each other in the Carabao Cup final. So the Conference League place that ends up going to the winners of the Carabao Cup or is allotted to those Carabao Cup winners goes to 7th place, right?
Yeah.
Now, the FA Cup, we don't know who wins it. We don't know who's in the final. But usually it's someone inside the top 7. So if it's someone inside the top 7, then that Europa League place then comes into the Premier League as well. So what we're talking about here is the top 5 in the Champions League, 6th, 7th in the Europa League, and 8th in the Conference League, likely. Now, it could be, if someone outside the top 7 wins the FA Cup, that it's 6th Europa League, 7th Conference League.
Yeah.
Either way, Brentford, Everton, Bournemouth, Newcastle, Sunderland still have a chance of getting European football of some kind next season.